I want you to ask yourself a deeply unsettling question today.
Oh boy, starting heavy.
Yeah, I mean, we really have to for this one.
Yeah.
So which is scarier? A nuclear war that vaporizes you instantly, like a blinding flash of light without a single second of warning. Or a biological war, where you actually survive the initial silent release, but over the next few days, as the foundational infrastructure of society just slowly unravels around you, you begin to deeply wish that you hadn't.
Wow. Yeah, that is a dark hypothetical.
Right. But it's exactly what we're getting into today on this deep dive. We are unpacking a frankly fascinating and deeply terrifying interview with investigative journalist Andy Jacobsen.
Her work is always so meticulously researched, which somehow makes it even scarier.
Exactly. And the sources we're looking at today cover the history, the science, and the very real future of biological warfare, synthetic pathogens, and honestly, the extreme fragility of modern society.
Which is something I think people really take for granted.
Well, absolutely. So our mission today is to shortcut you, the listener, to being comprehensively well-informed on an existential threat that is, frankly, vastly underdiscussed compared to nuclear war.
Yeah, we talk about nukes all the time. Bio threats, not so much.
Right. And look, the goal here isn't to induce a panic attack. It's to build awareness and explore the vital importance of public trust when it comes to preventing, basically, a near-extinction level event.
Which is a heavy burden, but like you said, we're neurologically wired to fear the sudden kinetic end, right? The atomic blast taps into this primal fear of immediate destruction.
It's giant, it's loud, it's fire.
Exactly. But a biological event operates on a completely different psychological vector. I mean, it is a slow, creeping realization that the environment itself has turned hostile.
Like the air you breathe.
Right. The air in your office, the handrail on the subway, the people you rely on for survival, they suddenly all become vectors of an invisible threat.
That is so deeply insidious.
It is. And defense experts actually categorize these two apocalyptic scenarios in a very specific way that really highlights the psychological difference.
Okay, let's unpack this because the terminology here is super interesting.
Yeah, so a nuclear attack is classified in defense circles as an event without warning.
Meaning it just happens.
Well, I mean, if an adversary launches a barrage of intercontinental ballistic missiles, early warning satellites do detect the infrared heat bloom of the rocket engines.
Okay.
And the National Command Authority is notified. But you have maybe 20 to 30 minutes. There is absolutely no mitigating the physical impact once those warheads re-enter the atmosphere. It is finite.
Right, the die is cast at that point.
Exactly. But a biological attack or even a catastrophic accidental lab leak, that is categorized as an event with warning.
Because of the science of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
because biology is bound by the laws of incubation and replication. You are granted this crucial window of time, and it's usually modeled by the Pentagon as being between 12 to 36 hours from the moment of detection.
12 to 36 hours. That is nothing.
It's incredibly narrow. But in that window, intervention is theoretically possible, so you have a warning. The terror stems from whether you can actually do anything with that warning before the mathematics of exponential transmission just take over.
And that statistical reality, it really flips the conventional script on existential threats. Like if you look at the Department of Defense's threat spectrum for weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons logically sit at the absolute extreme end regarding raw, immediate destructiveness, right?
They are the baseline for total destruction.
But biological weapons occupy a position right next to them in terms of societal devastation, while ranking exponentially higher in the probability of actual occurrence.
Yes.
Which means we're looking at a reality where the military establishment is far more concerned about a synthetic pathogen than a thermonuclear exchange.
They absolutely are, and the quantitative risk assessment backing up that military posture is stark. There's a philosopher, Toby Ord, at the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford.
Oh, yeah. He wrote The Precipice, right?
He did, yeah. And in that book, he modeled these probabilities extensively. He basically attempted to quantify the absolute chances of various global catastrophic risks, events that could permanently derail human civilization occurring within the next century.
Just a light reading topic.
Right. So he examined the historical base rates for natural extinction events, asteroid strikes, supervolcano eruptions, that sort of thing.
The dinosaur scenario.
Exactly. And he calculated the probability of a natural extinction level event in the next 100 years at roughly 1 in 10,000.
Okay, so 1 in 10,000. That feels like background noise.
It basically is. But then he modeled anthropogenic risks, meaning threats that we create ourselves. He places the probability of a nuclear war wiping us out at about 1 in 1,000.
Which is still a relatively low probability, assuming mutually assured destruction continues to act as a rational deterrent among, state actors.
Right, the idea that nobody wants to end the world because they live here too. But when Ord modeled the risk of an engineered pandemic, like a synthetic pathogen designed or accidentally released by human action, he calculated that probability at 1 in 30.
Wait, I'm sorry, 1 in 30.
1 in 30, yes.
For context, you have a higher probability of witnessing an engineered global pandemic in your lifetime than you do of rolling a specific number on a pair of dice or hitting a single number on a roulette wheel.
That is exactly right.
That massive delta between nuclear risk and biological risk,
Yeah.
it has to hinge on the barrier to entry, right?
It entirely hinges on that.
Yeah.
Nuclear weapons require an entire national economy to produce. I mean, you have to mine uranium, construct massive centrifuge cascades to enrich that uranium to weapons-grade U-235, and then engineer a highly complex implosion mechanism just to trigger the chain reaction.
Right, and the infrastructure for that is massive.
Yeah.
It's static, and it's highly visible to satellite surveillance. You can't hide a nuclear program easily.
You really can't. But biological engineering possesses no such barrier. The defense community actually refers to this as the democratization of destruction.
The democratization of destruction. That is a terrifying phrase.
It is, because the tools required to sequence, synthesize, and manipulate genetic material have undergone this exponential collapse in cost alongside a massive explosion in accessibility. It's far outpacing Moore's law in computing.
Wow.
Yeah, you no longer need a subterranean military bunker and billions of dollars in state funding to engineer a lethal pathogen. The synthesis of DNA can now be executed on desktop machines that are no larger than a standard laser printer.
The laser printer. So you can put this on your desk at home.
Essentially, yes. Bad actors can access digital repositories of genomic sequences online, download the exact genetic architecture of a highly virulent strain, and theoretically synthesize the biological material in a commercial garage space.
That is, the philosopher Nick Bostrom illustrates the sheer volatility of this technological acceleration using a really great thought experiment, the one about the urn filled with balls.
Yes, Bostrom's urn of balls analogy. It's a perfect framework for understanding technological discovery. So imagine human progress as reaching into a giant, opaque urn to draw out a ball.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Each ball represents a new technological discovery. Historically, humanity has mostly pulled out white balls. These are inherently beneficial technologies.
Like the Haber-Bosch process for synthesizing fertilizer, which feeds billions.
Sure.
Or penicillin.
Exactly. The printing press, the internet, mostly good stuff.
Right. But then we occasionally draw a gray ball, a technology that brings massive undeniable benefits, but also introduces profound civilization-altering dangers.
The internal combustion engine is a classic gray ball, right? It unlocked global transportation and industrialization. But the secondary effect is a slow-motion atmospheric crisis that threatens global stability.
And nuclear fission is another one. Limitless zero-carbon energy on one hand, but the capacity to incinerate entire cities on the other.
Precisely. We have managed to survive the gray balls so far through international treaties, regulation, and frankly, a huge degree of luck. But Bostrom postulates that somewhere in this urn, there is an unknown number of black balls.
Right. And a black ball is a technology whose default, almost unavoidable outcome is the permanent collapse of human civilization.
Yes.
And the scary part is, once you pull a black ball from the urn, you cannot put it back. The knowledge is out there forever.
Forever. And the convergence of advanced synthetic biology and generative artificial intelligence is widely considered by experts to be the most likely candidate for a black ball.
Because we are combining the biological capability to engineer novel pathogens with the computational power to optimize them for lethality and transmissibility.
Exactly. 10 years ago, the bleeding edge of this technology was heavily siloed within defense agencies. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they basically held the monopoly on high-level computational biology and threat modeling.
But today, that paradigm has inverted completely.
Completely. The private sector, driven by vast pools of venture capital, is advancing AI models and protein-folding algorithms at a velocity that government intelligence agencies literally cannot even track, let alone regulate.
Yeah, we've seen private individuals routinely exposing vulnerabilities in open-source AI models, prompting them to design novel chemical or biological agents. And it's fundamentally shocking, the defense establishment.
It really is.
Okay, so let's examine the safeguard mechanisms currently in place, because honestly, they seem terrifyingly brittle. Like if a researcher purchases one of these desktop DNA synthesizers we talked about, there are built-in software protocols designed to prevent the synthesis of known lethal pathogens, right? It operates on a tiered clearance system.
Yeah, it acts as an automated screening mechanism. So if you input a genetic sequence corresponding to a benign organism, say E. coli, which is commonly used in laboratory settings, the software cross-references it against a database, flags it green, and the machine synthesizes the DNA. No problem.
Okay, simple enough.
But if you input a sequence that shares partial homology or similarity with a restricted pathogen, it flags amber. This halts the process until the user provides institutional credentials and authorization.
So a human has to step in and say, yes, I'm at a real university, I'm doing real research.
Exactly. And then if you attempt to synthesize the precise genome for something like variola major, which is the virus responsible for smallpox, it flags red. The system locks down entirely, alerts the manufacturer, and subsequently, federal law enforcement is usually dispatched to your door.
Okay, but relying on a software patch to prevent an apocalyptic event ignores the fundamental reality of digital security. Software is malleable.
Highly malleable.
Open source AI models are continuously being jailbroken by users who manipulate the input prompts to bypass safety guardrails. People do for fun on the internet every day.
They absolutely do.
So if the barrier between a bad actor and the physical synthesis of smallpox is just a digital firewall on a commercial device, I mean, that isn't a robust defense. That's a gray ball sitting in plain sight.
The fragility of that digital screening is exactly why the proliferation of the hardware itself is the primary concern for intelligence agencies. We are trying to impose mid-20th century non-proliferation strategies designed for physical uranium and massive centrifuges onto digital, decentralized biological data.
And it fundamentally does not translate.
Not at all.
But look, if we look at this objectively, the democratization of this technology isn't a secret. The instructions are out there, the hardware is getting cheaper, and human history is littered with nihilistic actors and doomsday cults. Like, remember Elium Shinrikyo? They actively attempted to deploy biological weapons in the 1990s.
They did, yeah.
So I have to ask, if the barrier to entry has truly plummeted to the level of a desktop synthesizer, why haven't we seen a catastrophic bioterror event yet?
That paradox is the central debate in modern biosecurity right now. The limiting factor historically has not been the acquisition of the pathogen, but the weaponization and dissemination of it.
Right, it's the delivery mechanism.
Yeah. Because biology is inherently chaotic. When a military drops a conventional munition, they calculate the blast radius and thermal yield with mathematical precision. They understand what they call the circular error probable.
A bullet with legs, basically.
Yeah.
But no, a conventional bomb is predictable. But a biological agent lacks that predictability.
Exactly. If a rogue actor releases a genetically modified influenza virus in a dense urban transit hub, the environmental variables are staggering. Humidity, UV light exposure, the baseline immunological health of the targets, the mutation rate of the virus itself once it's in the wild.
So it could just fizzle out?
It might burn out after infecting a dozen people, yes. Or it might undergo a phenotypic shift, circle the globe, and inevitably eradicate the population the attacker belongs to as well. State actors detest biological weapons precisely because they cannot be controlled once they're deployed.
Right. I always think of it like my analogy. A bullet's kinetic energy stops when it hits a target, but a pathogen is a living munition. It adapts. It has a mind of its own.
That's a great way to put it.
But deterrence theory relies on the assumption of a rational actor who fears blowback. A lone wolf or an accelerationist group seeking civilizational collapse doesn't care about the blowback. Which leads us to how these highly optimized pathogens are created in the first place. Because this technology wasn't born in some clandestine weapons facility, was it?
No, not at all. It emerged from a genuine desire to cure disease. The foundational architecture of genetic engineering traces back to 1971 at Stanford University under the direction of biochemist Paul Berg.
Okay.
Berg's team successfully engineered the first recombinant DNA molecule. They essentially took the genetic material from two distinct organisms, specifically the SV40 monkey virus and the lambda phage virus, and they spliced them together in a test tube.
So he created a chimera.
Exactly. He demonstrated that DNA wasn't this rigid, immutable code, but rather a modular programming language, one that could be edited, cut, and pasted across species barriers.
Which is incredible for medicine.
It is. Berg's work, which actually earned him the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, laid the absolute bedrock for modern biotechnology, synthetic insulin, targeted gene therapies, all the good stuff. But it also opened the door to the intentional modification of pathogens to alter their baseline behavior.
And this brings us to the highly contentious realm of gain-of-function research.
Yes, the elephant in the room.
But to understand the modern threat landscape, we have to unpack gain-of-function fundamentally. It is the process of taking an existing, naturally occurring pathogen and intentionally manipulating its genetic code to grant it new capabilities, right?
That is the textbook definition, yes.
Yeah, you might engineer a virus to become transmissible across species barriers, or you might increase its virulence, or you might alter its surface protein so it evades existing immune responses or antibiotics. The immediate, logical question that I think anyone listening would ask is, why would any scientist actively choose to make a dangerous virus deadlier?
It sounds counterintuitive, right? But the primary argument underpinning gain-of-function research, which is often termed enhanced potential pandemic pathogen research by regulatory bodies, is heavily defensive.
Okay, defensive how?
Proponents argue that viral evolution in nature is constant and completely unpredictable. Zoonotic spillovers, where a virus jumps from an animal to a human, they happen naturally.
Right, like avian flu or Ebola.
Exactly. Therefore, researchers argue that if they can proactively force these mutations in a highly controlled laboratory environment, they can anticipate how a specific virus might evolve to infect humans in the future.
Ah, I see. By understanding the precise genetic pathways a virus takes to achieve human-to-human transmission, the medical community can preemptively design broad-spectrum vaccines and antiviral countermeasures before the natural pandemic ever occurs.
That is the exact intent: preemptive medical intelligence.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This creates an agonizing dual-use technology paradox. Any technology capable of mapping the optimal evolutionary path for a pathogen to slaughter humanity is, by definition, the exact technology required to build that pathogen as a weapon.
Yes.
It's like the invention of fire. You can use it to cook meat and stay warm, or you can use it to burn down the neighboring tribe's village. The defense and the offense require the exact same physical infrastructure. To build the shield, you first have to forge the sword.
And the proliferation of the facilities required to forge that sword is where the mathematical risk absolutely skyrockets. Prior to the anthrax attacks in late 2001, biological defense was a relatively specialized niche field within the U.S. government.
Right, it wasn't front-page news.
Exactly. But the moment weaponized anthrax spores were distributed through the U.S. postal system, shutting down the Senate and killing 5 people, the threat became tangible. The national security apparatus pivoted aggressively, flooding billions of dollars into biodefense and the development of medical countermeasures.
And to conduct that research safely, you need maximum containment. You need biosafety level 4 laboratories, or BSL-4s. These are the facilities designed to handle the most lethal, incurable pathogens on Earth. Things like Ebola, Marburg, Nipah virus.
And the engineering of a BSL-4 facility is extraordinary. I mean, they operate on dedicated, independent air supply systems with multiple HEPA filtration stages to capture microscopic viral particles. The laboratories maintain negative air pressure.
Wait, what does negative air pressure do?
It ensures that if a structural breach occurs, like a door seal fails, air forcefully flows into the facility from the outside rather than the contaminated air flowing out.
Oh, that makes sense.
And researchers inside wear positive pressure encapsulation suits. They are essentially operating in a self-contained life support system while handling the pathogens in sealed biological safety cabinets. It's like being on a space station.
Right, the classic moon suits you see in movies.
Mm.
And prior to 9/11, the United States maintained only 2 operational BSL-4 laboratories.
2.
But in response to the anthrax attacks, that number didn't just increase, it exploded. The U.S. expanded from 2 BSL-4 labs to roughly 15, and alongside that was the construction of over 1,000 BSL-3 laboratories.
Which handle slightly less lethal but still highly dangerous pathogens like Mycobacterium tuberculosis or the plague bacteria.
Over 1,000 of those. This rapid expansion introduces the law of large numbers into biosecurity. As you dramatically increase the number of maximum containment facilities, the volume of high-risk research, the number of technicians handling lethal agents, and the sheer mechanical surface area of the infrastructure, the statistical probability of human error or mechanical failure rises correspondingly.
It's unavoidable math. A BSL-4 lab is a marvel of engineering, but it is ultimately operated by human beings who experience fatigue, miscommunication, and procedural lapses.
I mean, if some of the top Pentagon brass claim that gain of function is basically just a euphemism for biological weapons engineering, aren't we just building our own doomsday devices and calling it defense?
And that is exactly why the nature of the research being conducted inside these newly minted labs immediately began generating deep unease within the broader scientific community.
Yeah, the source material highlights two specific experiments that really illustrate the terrifying edge of this science. Walk me through the 2001 Australian mousepox experiment.
Okay, so in 2001, researchers in Australia were conducting experiments on mousepox. And to be clear, their goal wasn't nefarious. They were exploring immunocontraception in mice as a pest control strategy.
Basically trying to control the mouse population.
Right, so to boost the immune response in the mice, they inserted a specific gene, the gene that produces interleukin-4 or IL-4, into the mousepox virus.
And what happened?
The immunological cascade that resulted from that single genetic insertion was catastrophic for the mice. Pox viruses typically require a robust cell-mediated immune response to clear the infection. The insertion of the IL-4 gene fundamentally skewed the mice's immune system. It hyperstimulated antibody production while completely suppressing the cell-mediated response.
Meaning, it effectively blinded the immune system to the virus.
Precisely. The researchers tested this engineered strain on mice that possessed natural genetic resistance to mousepox, and the mice died. Even more alarmingly, they tested it on mice that had been recently and successfully vaccinated against mousepox, and those mice also died.
Wow.
The modified virus completely bypassed the vaccine-induced immunity. This sent shockwaves through the biodefense community because it provided a clear, reproducible blueprint for how to engineer a pathogen to evade the exact medical countermeasures a population relies on for survival.
It proved that biological defense mechanisms are not absolute.
Yeah.
And then we get to 2012, where the paradigm shifted from evading vaccines to engineering transmission.
Sure.
The H5N1 ferret flu experiment.
Yes. H5N1, which is avian influenza, is notoriously lethal. The historical case fatality rates in humans hover around 50 to 60%. If you contract it, your chances of survival are essentially a coin flip.
Which is horrifying. But historically, H5N1 lacks the ability to transmit easily between mammals, right? It requires deep respiratory exposure, usually through direct contact with infected poultry.
Yes, and the physical mechanics of that limitation come down to receptor binding. Avian influenza viruses primarily bind to alpha-2/3 linked sialic acid receptors, which in humans are located deep within the lower respiratory tract of lungs.
Okay.
Because the infection is seated so deeply, normal breathing or coughing doesn't expel significant quantities of the virus into the air. Human influenza viruses, however, bind to alpha-2/6 linked sialic acid receptors, which are densely populated in the upper respiratory tract, the nose and throat. This makes them highly efficient at aerosol transmission.
So a team led by virologist Ron Fauci in the Netherlands wanted to determine if H5N1 could mutate to acquire that upper respiratory binding capability. And they used ferrets because ferrets serve as the gold standard animal model for human respiratory diseases.
Right, their respiratory systems are very similar to ours.
So they deliberately mutated the hemagglutinin protein on the surface of the H5N1 virus, forcing the virus to adapt through a process called serial passage, meaning infecting one ferret, extracting the mutated virus, and infecting the next.
And after just a handful of passages, the virus acquired specific mutations, notably a substitution in the hemagglutinin protein that allowed it to efficiently bind to those alpha-206 mammalian receptors.
Which means the virus became fully airborne.
Fully airborne. They placed an infected ferret in a cage adjacent to a healthy ferret, separated by a physical barrier that only allowed airflow, and the healthy ferret contracted the highly lethal H5N1 virus simply by breathing the shared air.
They took one of the deadliest viruses on the planet and explicitly engineered it to transmit like the common cold. When the scientific community is publishing methodologies on how to transform an avian virus into a highly lethal airborne mammalian pathogen, the line between biodefense research and biological weapons engineering becomes entirely subjective.
It relies solely on the internal intent of the researcher, and the biological architecture of the virus doesn't care about intent.
Exactly. And relying on the presumed benevolence of state actors handling this dual-use technology is, frankly, historically naive. If we look at how this science was weaponized on an industrial scale, we must examine the Soviet Union's biological warfare apparatus.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the history gets really dark.
Because in 1969, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a unilateral executive decision to terminate the United States' offensive biological weapons program. The U.S. dismantled its facilities and destroyed its stockpiles. And this momentum led to the signing of the Biological Weapons Convention, or BWC, in 1972.
Right, and the treaty established a global norm. It declared the development, production, and stockpiling of biological weapons to be repugnant to the conscience of mankind.
It was a moment of profound international optimism. The Soviet Union was a primary signatory. They agreed to unequivocally ban biological weapons. But behind the Iron Curtain, they engaged in one of the most massive and sustained deceptions in modern military history.
While the United States was destroying its biological arsenal and publishing Paul Berg's early research on recombinant DNA in open scientific journals for the world to see, the Soviet leadership recognized the strategic potential of molecular biology. They established an illicit, sprawling network of clandestine research and production facilities known as Biopreparat.
And the scale of biopreparat is difficult to comprehend. It was not a handful of rogue scientists in a basement. It was a state-sponsored enterprise employing upwards of 30,000 scientists, engineers, and military personnel.
30,000 people. Let that sink in.
And they were carefully concealed within civilian pharmaceutical plants and agricultural research institutes. They functioned as the ultimate intellectual property thieves, like the China of the 70s for IP theft, absorbing the recombinant DNA techniques pioneered in the West and applying them directly to weapons development. And for 2 decades, the CIA and British intelligence were virtually blind to the sheer magnitude of the program.
The intelligence failure was profound. It wasn't until 1989 that the West fully grasped the terrifying reality of what the Soviets had achieved.
And that revelation came through a defection, right?
Yeah, Vladimir Paseknik. He was a senior microbiologist and a pivotal figure within Biopreparat. Paseknik directed the Institute of Ultra-Pure Biochemical Preparations in Leningrad, which was a facility explicitly tasked with weaponizing the plague.
The actual plague.
Yes. Because of his elite status, he was occasionally permitted to travel to Western Europe to procure specialized laboratory equipment that the Soviet Union could not manufacture themselves.
And during a trip to France, Paseknik just reached a breaking point. The moral weight of engineering mass casualty weapons overtook him. He evaded his KGB handlers in Paris, found a public telephone booth, and contacted the British embassy.
Can you imagine the tension in that phone booth?
Incredible. British intelligence exfiltrated him to London, where he was extensively debriefed by Dr. Christopher Davis, who is the sole intelligence officer in the UK Ministry of Defence, tasked with assessing biological threats at the time.
Right. And Paseknik detailed a program that defied Western strategic logic. They were not merely stockpiling traditional pathogens. They were utilizing advanced genetic engineering to manufacture tons of weaponized smallpox and, most alarmingly, designing what they refer to as a super plague.
A super plague. When Dr. Davis alerted his American counterparts, the CIA dispatched Joshua Lederberg, a Nobel laureate and leading geneticist, to London to evaluate Paseknik's claims. And Lederberg quickly realized that the Soviet scientists had systematically solved the biological limitations that typically hindered bioweapons. They had engineered a pathogen that checked the 3 essential boxes of an apocalyptic weapon.
Right, the trifecta.
First, absolute transmissibility. The weapon had to be perfectly aerosolized, capable of surviving environmental degradation long enough to be inhaled deep into the lungs of thousands of targets simultaneously.
Check.
Second, extreme virulence. They were not interested in a pathogen that just incapacitated enemy troops. They engineered for a 100% case fatality rate. And third, evasion. The pathogen had to be genetically hardened against the medical countermeasures, specifically antibiotics, that the target nation would inevitably deploy.
And to achieve this, Biopreparat focused heavily on Yersinia pestis, the bacteria responsible for the plague.
Let's talk about the difference between bubonic and pneumonic plague, because it's crucial here. Historically, bubonic plague relies on the bite of an infected flea to transmit the bacteria into the human lymphatic system.
Right, you get the swollen lymph nodes, the buboes.
But the Soviets bypassed the vector entirely, engineering the bacteria to be delivered via an aerosol cloud directly into the alveoli of the lungs, causing pneumonic plague.
And pneumonic plague is vastly more aggressive than bubonic. Once the bacteria colonies establish themselves in the respiratory tract, the host essentially drowns in their own fluids. Without the immediate administration of heavy intravenous antibiotics, the fatality rate of pneumonic plague approaches 100%.
Almost certain death.
Yes, the therapeutic window is brutally short. If medical intervention does not occur within the first 24 hours of the onset of symptoms, the resulting septicemia and cascading organ failure are totally irreversible.
The strategic doctrine behind this specific design is just chilling. The Soviet Politburo recognized that a thermonuclear strike destroys the very infrastructure you seek to conquer. It irradiates the soil and flattens the industrial base.
It leaves you with nothing to rule.
Right. An engineered, antibiotic-resistant pneumonic plague operates as a biological neutron bomb. It targets the human population exclusively, leaving the cities, the manufacturing centers, and the energy grids perfectly intact. It's basically a delete button for humans. You deploy the aerosol cloud, wait for the pathogen to run its course and the population to perish, and then you just walk in and occupy the pristine infrastructure.
But the psychological component of this strategy is even more insidious than the physical one.
How?
Well, the intention wasn't merely to kill Americans. It was to shatter the structural integrity of American society. By engineering the plague to resist every known antibiotic in the U.S. strategic arsenal, the Soviets aimed to forcibly regress the target nation to the pre-antibiotic era.
Oh, to completely fracture trust in medicine.
Exactly. When the citizenry realizes that the medical establishment is powerless and the government cannot fulfill its fundamental duty to protect them, civil order collapses. The pathogen kills the individual, but the subsequent loss of trust kills the society.
Wow. And this psychological warfare objective is perfectly encapsulated in a specific research avenue Pasechnik revealed, the sinister euphoria gene. This part blew my mind.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
Right. So the Soviet scientists recognized that human biology has an evolutionary defense mechanism against rapid viral spread. When you contract a severe infection, the body initiates a massive immune response, often a cytokine storm. You experience a high fever, severe lethargy, and profound physical distress.
Which forces you to isolate. You collapse into bed, you effectively quarantine yourself, and you break the chain of transmission.
But the bioprepared engineers viewed that natural isolation response as a mechanical flaw in their weapons dissemination. To correct it, they allegedly researched the insertion of a specific genetic sequence into the plague genome, a sequence designed to alter the neurochemical state of the host during the critical early stages of infection.
The euphoria gene. The theoretical mechanism involves splicing in a peptide sequence that triggers a massive cascade of endorphins or dopamine in the host's brain shortly after infection,
which chemically overrides the physical distress signals of the immune response.
Think about the tactical implication of that. You inhale an aerosolized, genetically modified, 100% lethal strain of pneumonic plague. But instead of the crippling fever that would normally force you into bed, your brain is flooded with endorphins. You experience a profound, unnatural sense of well-being, energy, and sociability. You feel invincible.
So you seek out social interaction. Instead of staying in bed, you go to a crowded transit hub, a sports arena, or a packed disco. You spend the first 24 to 48 hours of the infection highly mobile, breathing heavily, talking loudly, and interacting in dense environments, acting as a highly efficient mobile superspreader.
Exactly. The euphoria masks the rapid bacterial colonization of your lungs until the absolute critical mass is reached, at which point the neurochemical override fails, you collapse into terminal respiratory distress, and die.
It is the literal weaponization of human sociology. It hijacks our fundamental biological drive for connection and turns it into the primary vector of our annihilation.
It's incredibly dark genius.
But this specific timeline raises a critical tactical question for me regarding disease modeling. If you look at epidemiological models for maximum global spread-like, anyone who's played the mobile game Plague Inc. knows this, the optimal strategy usually favors a prolonged incubation period. A virus that sits silently in a host for 2 or 3 weeks, spreading asymptomatically across international borders before anyone realizes an outbreak is occurring, that seems far more dangerous. Why did the Soviet scenario specifically choose a fast-acting 1 to 3 day pathogen? Doesn't a rapid onset limit the geographic spread of the weapon?
That's a really sharp question. A prolonged incubation period is devastating for silent global proliferation, yes, but it also provides the international health apparatus with a massive advantage once the pathogen is finally detected.
Because they have time.
Exactly. It grants researchers weeks or months to sequence the genome, develop diagnostic tests, implement travel restrictions, and begin the arduous process of vaccine development. The Soviet doctrine was not designed for slow, silent pandemic. It was designed for sudden, overwhelming systemic shock.
They wanted to overwhelm the response capabilities before they could even be activated.
Precisely. If the incubation period is incredibly tight, 24 to 72 hours, and the pathogen is entirely resistant to frontline medical interventions, you create localized explosions of catastrophic mortality. The sheer velocity of the dying triggers immediate visceral panic in the surrounding population.
And people panicking is bad for infrastructure.
Terrible. From a strategic perspective, human panic moves vastly faster and does more immediate structural damage to a nation's logistical supply chains than the biological agent itself.
Okay, let's apply that Soviet blueprint to the modern geopolitical landscape. The source material walks through a terrifying scenario based directly on Pentagon war games, projecting how a biological event of this magnitude would actually unfold in real time. It's called the six-day scenario.
Right, and it doesn't start with a deliberate terrorist attack. It begins with an industrial accident at a specific facility in Russia.
The scenario centers on the Vector Lab, located in Koltsovo, which is a science town situated in Siberia near Novosibirsk. During a Cold War, Vector was a crown jewel of the Biopreparedness network, heavily involved in the weaponization of smallpox, Marburg, and various engineered hemorrhagic fevers.
And today, it remains one of the few BSL-4 laboratories in Russia, and it is widely understood by Western intelligence to retain extensive repositories of those legacy bioweapons strains.
Right. So the war game postulates a kinetic event, an explosion or a catastrophic mechanical failure that breaches the physical containment architecture of the Vector facility, releasing a concentrated aerosol plume of genetically modified, antibiotic-resistant pneumonic plague into the surrounding atmosphere.
And obviously, the Russian government isn't going to just call Washington and tell them.
No. But the United States intelligence community does not rely on diplomatic cables to learn about an event of this magnitude anyway. They rely on a multi-layered, highly integrated sensory network that monitors these critical sites 24 hours a day.
Right. The first layer of detection is orbital. The National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, operates constellations of classified geostationary satellites equipped with advanced electro-optical and infrared sensors.
Now, these platforms cannot detect microscopic bacterial spores, obviously, but they are highly sensitive to thermal signatures and kinetic blasts.
Exactly. If an explosion breaches a containment facility in Siberia, the NRO detects the thermal bloom and the structural damage almost instantly.
And that visual intelligence triggers the second layer. Signals intelligence, managed by the National Security Agency, the NSA. The NSA immediately directs its collection assets to vacuum up all electronic communications emanating from the Koltsovo region.
They run algorithms searching for specific lexicon shifts, sudden spikes in military encrypted traffic, emergency medical dispatches, or panicked communications among facility personnel indicating a containment failure rather than a standard industrial accident.
But the most definitive confirmation comes from a lesser-known intelligence discipline called measurement and signature intelligence.
Yes, Masonty is fascinating. This involves the deployment of highly sensitive, remote environmental sensors designed to detect the specific chemical and spectral signatures associated with biological containment and decontamination.
The intelligence community has covertly placed these sensors in the immediate vicinity of facilities like Vector. We were talking about microsensors embedded in local infrastructure, perhaps sniffing wastewater outflow pipes, or attached to high-altitude drones sampling the atmospheric boundary layer. They're constantly analyzing the chemical composition of the environment.
And when a biological breach occurs, the immediate response protocol of the host facility is extreme chemical decontamination to neutralize the escaping agent.
They cover up their tracks.
They try to. They will flood the environment with massive volumes of sterilizing agents, often highly concentrated quaternary ammonium compounds, chlorine dioxide, or formaldehyde gas.
And the MESINT sensors are calibrated to detect the sudden, massive spike in volatile organic compounds and specific molecular signatures that result from this chemical scrubbing. By analyzing the concentration and the atmospheric dispersal pattern, intelligence analysts can confirm not only that a breach occurred, but roughly calculate the volume of the release.
So within hours, Washington is aware that a lethal plume has escaped a known bioweapons facility, but they are operating inside that terrifying 12 to 36-hour window, and the pathogen is already on the move.
Because the incubation period is 1 to 3 days, individuals exposed to the initial plume feel perfectly healthy. In the war game scenario, a group of international hunters operating near Novosibirsk inhale the aerosolized bacteria. Unaware of their exposure, they board commercial flights to various global hubs.
And one of these individuals lands at Los Angeles International Airport.
Right. And through a series of interactions, the pathogen is introduced into the dense, highly vulnerable population of Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles.
This specific insertion point exposes a fatal vulnerability in the United States' domestic biodefense architecture. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention manages a highly sophisticated nationwide syndromic surveillance network called Biosense.
Biosense, right. It is an algorithmic early warning system integrated into the electronic health records of thousands of hospitals, urgent care centers, and emergency departments nationwide.
It continuously monitors the intake data, patient temperatures, respiratory complaints, specific medical billing codes, searching for anomalous statistical clusters that might indicate the leading edge of a novel outbreak in real time.
It is designed to spot the spark before it becomes a wildfire. But Biosense has a massive structural blind spot. It only functions if the infected individuals interact with the formal, digitized healthcare system.
Which is a huge problem.
America's 800,000 homeless people are entirely off the grid. Los Angeles has tens of thousands of unhoused individuals living in densely packed encampments. This population operates largely outside the formal medical infrastructure.
When the engineered plague begins to spread through Skid Row, the initial victims do not go to emergency rooms connected to Biosense. They rely on underfunded free clinics or simply suffer in their tents.
And the symptoms of early-stage pneumonic plague, severe cough, bloody sputum, profound respiratory distress, they mimic the baseline health crises already prevalent in that population, such as advanced tuberculosis, severe influenza, or complications from synthetic opioid overdoses.
Frontline healthcare workers, lacking the diagnostic capacity to immediately sequence the bacteria, misdiagnose the initial wave.
By the time a hospital finally runs a comprehensive pathology report and confirms the presence of genetically modified Yersinia pestis, the pathogen has been cycling through an incredibly dense, highly mobile population for days. The mathematical advantage of the warning window has completely evaporated.
And while the public health crisis detonates in Los Angeles, the strategic crisis in Washington, D.C. escalates into what military planners define as a wicked problem.
A wicked problem. This is defense nomenclature for a problem where the solution creates even more catastrophic problems, right?
Exactly. This concept describes a highly complex crisis where every potential solution fundamentally alters the nature of the problem, often creating secondary catastrophes that are worse than the initial threat. There is no definitive test of a solution, and you only get one chance to act.
So let's trace the agonizing logic of this wicked problem. U.S. intelligence has confirmed the lab leak in Siberia. The biological agent is spreading, and epidemiological modeling shows it will achieve unstoppable global proliferation within days if the source is not neutralized. The diplomatic protocol dictates that the State Department immediately contacts Moscow, presents the Mason-Ent data, and offers joint containment assistance.
But acknowledging the accident requires Moscow to admit to the active possession and operation of an illicit genetically engineered bioweapons facility.
Which constitutes a massive violation of the Biological Weapons Convention and international law.
Yes, the geopolitical ramifications are severe. Therefore, the historical precedent is absolute denial.
We have a direct historical parallel for this exact behavior. The Sverdlovsk incident in 1971.
Sverdlovsk, yes.
A technician at a covert biopreparedness facility known as Compound 19 removed a clogged exhaust filter from an anthrax drying machine and just forgot to leave a note for the next shift. The machine was turned on without the filter, releasing a concentrated plume of aerosolized anthrax spores into the nighttime air. And the wind carried the plume directly over the surrounding civilian neighborhoods.
Dozens of people died rapidly from inhalational anthrax, and the Soviet government initiated a massive cover-up, deploying the KGB to confiscate medical records and fundamentally altering the official cause of death to gastrointestinal anthrax, claiming the citizens had simply consumed contaminated meat purchased on the black market.
And it wasn't until the 1990s when Western scientists like Matthew Meselson were finally permitted to analyze the epidemiological data that the truth was definitively proven. Meselson mapped the locations of the victims during the time of the release and demonstrated that the death plume aligned perfectly with the meteorological wind data for that specific day, originating directly from Compound 19.
So, given that history of denial, Washington assumes Moscow will refuse to neutralize the vector facility.
Right. And then the President of the United States is presented with a terrifying military option. Launch a preemptive strike to completely obliterate the laboratory and incinerate the remaining biological agents before they can be further dispersed.
And here we hit the absolute core of the wicked problem. You cannot use conventional kinetic explosives to neutralize a biological weapons facility.
Why not? Just bomb it. Right.
If a bomber drops a massive ordnance penetrator, a bunker buster, onto a facility housing vats of aerosolized plague, the resulting kinetic pressure wave does not destroy the biological organisms. The explosion violently atomizes the fluid, thrusting millions of lethal particles high into the atmospheric boundary layer, vastly accelerating the geographic dispersal of the pathogen.
So a conventional strike literally does the weapon's job for it. It just spreads it further.
Exactly. To fundamentally neutralize a biological agent, you must break its molecular bonds. You need a thermal event so extreme and instantaneous that it denatures the proteins and incinerates the organic material before the pressure wave can disperse it.
And the only weapon in the United States strategic arsenal capable of generating that requisite incinerating heat over a sufficiently wide radius is a thermonuclear warhead.
The tactical reality is staggering. There are highly classified continuity of government and strategic defense directives that theoretically authorize the preemptive use of a nuclear weapon against a biological target, specifically for this thermal incineration capability.
So to prevent a biological apocalypse, the commander-in-chief is forced to initiate a nuclear first strike against a sovereign, nuclear-armed adversary, almost guaranteeing a retaliatory thermonuclear exchange. Thus, the trigger to stop a biological apocalypse is launching a nuclear apocalypse.
The proposed solution to prevent World War III is to start World War III.
It's insane. But the agonizing ambiguity of biology paralyzes the decision-making process. Like, if radar detects an incoming ICBM, the threat is mathematically certain. You launch on a warning. But biology is probabilistic. The intelligence analyst must present this nuclear option to the president based on Mason data and plume modeling, and the president will inevitably ask, are you absolutely certain this will cause a global pandemic?
And science cannot provide absolute certainty. The math of ambiguity is huge here. The source material highlights this by noting that 40,000 individual plague particles can fit on the head of a pin. The microscopic scale defies intuitive understanding. Despite decades of research, virologists and epidemiologists still fiercely debate the exact critical mass, the precise numerical viral or bacterial load needed to guarantee systemic infection in a human host.
We still don't even know the exact critical mass of particles needed to infect someone with COVID.
Exactly. So if the scientific community cannot definitively establish the infectious dose of the pathogen, how can a political leader justify the vaporization of a city to stop it?
They can't. The ambiguity creates hesitation. The 36-hour containment window closes, the nuclear option is taken off the table, and the pathogen hits the global population. So what does this all mean? We're way past the time of successfully quarantining a city, especially in our modern era. Is the real existential danger the biological organism itself, or is it the hypercomplex, deeply fragile societal system of systems that shatters when the germ begins to spread?
The pathogen is merely the catalyst. The complexity of modern society provides the fuel.
Let's talk about the aftermath of an outbreak. The war game scenario outlines a brutal transition in the posture of the federal government. Within 6 days of the pathogen breaking containment and establishing sustained community transmission, the goal of the Department of Defense abandons the illusion of public containment.
The strategic focus pivots entirely from protecting the civilian population to ensuring the survival of critical infrastructure.
Right. Roads, power plants, DoD facilities. If the critical infrastructure fails, the cascade effect is terminal. The power grid, the municipal water purification facilities, the telecommunications networks, and the strategic logistics corridors. These systems require constant active human management. When the operators succumb to the pathogen or just abandon their post to protect their families, the grid goes dark.
The specialized military units trained for weapons of mass destruction response, they are not deployed to civilian hospitals to assist with triage. They are deployed in hazardous material suits to physically secure the nuclear power plants and the primary strategic command centers,
leaving the public completely on their own. As the medical infrastructure collapses under the sheer volume of casualties, the survival of the populace hinges entirely on a highly classified federal asset, the Strategic National Stockpile, or SNS.
The concept of the SNS is fascinating, but also deeply flawed. It is a distributed network of massive, highly secure warehouse facilities strategically positioned across the United States.
They hold what the government refers to as 12-hour push packages. These are vast caches of broad-spectrum antibiotics, vaccines, antivirals, ventilators, and emergency medical equipment, engineered to be loaded onto specialized cargo aircraft and delivered to any major urban center in the country within 12 hours of a federal emergency declaration.
And while the existence and general purpose of the SNS are publicly acknowledged, the specific geographic coordinates of these warehouses are highly classified national security secrets.
Naturally. Because in a scenario involving a pathogen with near 100% lethality, those discrete warehouses transform into the most critical strategic targets on the continent. They hold the only biological defense left.
But maintaining the secrecy of massive logistical hubs in the modern era of ubiquitous satellite imagery and artificial intelligence is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, the source material highlights a deeply concerning anecdote regarding the vulnerability of these SNS locations. An investigative journalist utilized a commercially available large language model, specifically ChatGPT, and engineered a series of analytical prompts to effectively jailbreak the AI's safety guardrails.
The AI was tasked with cross-referencing massive data sets of publicly available information, federal commercial lease agreements, localized power grid consumption anomalies, and specific logistical infrastructure patterns.
And it worked. The AI algorithm successfully pinpointed the exact location of a classified SNS facility by identifying telltale signs. Unique spatial signatures like massive, heavily fortified warehouse structures featuring dedicated commercial rail lines that enter the perimeter fencing but do not exit, indicating a facility designed for massive, one-way material intake and storage.
The fact that commercial open-source AI can deduce classified national security coordinates by connecting mundane logistical data points demonstrates a profound vulnerability in strategic secrecy.
I mean, if an investigative journalist can command an AI to map the stockpile, it is mathematically certain that foreign intelligence services, organized domestic militias, and terrified, heavily armed civilian mobs can do the exact same thing. When the public realizes that the mortality rate is absolute and the only pharmaceutical salvation is locked inside those specific warehouses, the social contract completely disintegrates. There will be immediate insurrection over access to the SNS.
Which triggers the ultimate, absolute failsafe of the United States government: devolution.
Devolution. We are familiar with the DEFCON system for military readiness, but devolution falls under COGTON continuity of government readiness conditions. When civic order collapses into widespread armed conflict over the stockpile, the federal apparatus initiates its final protocol.
Devolution is the highly classified, meticulously rehearsed process by which a microscopic fraction of the government, specifically pre-selected executive branch officials, military commanders, and vital technical personnel with literal go bags, are systematically evacuated from the public sphere.
They are relocated via dedicated military transport to subterranean, hardened, secure facilities, such as the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania or the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center in Virginia, abandoning the populace while society tears itself apart.
The objective of devolution is not to manage the crisis for the public. It is purely to ensure that the constitutional and legal abstraction of the United States government survives the biological extinction of its citizenry. It is the institutional abandonment of the populace.
It's every man for himself at that point. And this leads us to synthesize the ultimate lesson of this entire source material. All of these advanced biological concepts, gain of function, recombinant DNA, aerosolized dispersion, they ultimately circle back to a single sociological variable: public trust.
Yes. The source material offers a profound analogy, suggesting that we should view the COVID-19 pandemic not merely as a public health crisis, but as a vaccine that went wrong for the societal immune system.
That is such a fascinating way to look at it. In a biological context, a vaccine introduces a weakened, non-lethal version of a pathogen into the body. It trains the immune system to recognize the threat, mobilize defenses, and build robust antibodies so that when the truly lethal variant arrives, the body is prepared.
Right. And societally, COVID-19 possessed a relatively low case fatality rate, hovering around 1%. It should have functioned as a systemic stress test, revealing the profound fragilities in our just-in-time medical supply chains, the vulnerabilities in our elder care facilities, and the necessity for unified, transparent federal communication.
It should have galvanized society to build robust structural immunity for the inevitable arrival of a higher lethality pathogen. But the societal immune system did not build antibodies. It suffered a massive autoimmune response. The pandemic deeply fractured the foundational trust between the citizenry and the institutions tasked with protecting them. Science became deeply politicized. Public health directives were viewed through the lens of partisan warfare, and trust in the basic competency of politicians eroded significantly.
A crucial component of that institutional failure centers on the intense public and scientific debate surrounding the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, specifically regarding the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Now, to be absolutely clear and neutral here, the scientific consensus remains divided. Whether the virus emerged through natural zoonotic spillover at a wet market, or whether it was the result of a lab leak, a topic where the jury is still very much out, the critical failure was not the origin itself, but how the institutions handled the inquiry.
Exactly. The immediate reflexive posture of many scientific and governmental institutions was to aggressively suppress the laboratory leak hypothesis. It was not treated as a valid scientific variable requiring rigorous investigation. It was actively stigmatized as dangerous misinformation.
And when authoritative bodies project absolute, unyielding certainty on a deeply ambiguous issue and are subsequently forced by emerging evidence to walk back that certainty and admit the possibility of alternative hypotheses, they inflict incalculable long-term damage on future public trust. It is a structural failure of communication. If public health officials lack the humility to say, "We don't know yet, we are investigating all avenues," they train the public to view all future guidance with deep suspicion.
And this dynamic is entirely nonpartisan. It is a fundamental breakdown of institutional trust. And that breakdown dramatically amplifies the threat of the 1 in 30 probability we discussed earlier.
Right, because if a real 100% fatality pathogen scenario happens tomorrow, the United States faces that threat with a deeply cynical, highly fractured population. We're talking about 340 million Americans who collectively own 700 million guns. If a rapidly lethal plague begins spreading and the public fundamentally does not trust the containment guidance, the quarantine protocols, or the pharmaceutical distribution plans issued by the government, the resulting chaos is unimaginable.
You do not get orderly cooperative lockdowns. You get immediate, heavily armed conflict over resources.
Bring up the absurdity of hoarding toilet paper during COVID. If people physically rioted in supermarkets over basic sanitation supplies for a virus with a 1% fatality rate, what happens when the fatality rate is 100%? The psychological reaction to a pathogen that guarantees agonizing death will be instantaneous and violent.
We have historical precedents that model this exact sociological collapse. During the mid-14th century, the bubonic plague, the Black Death, swept through Europe, killing an estimated 30 to 50% of the population.
The structural collapse of society was absolute.
Yes. Contemporary accounts, most notably Giovanni Boccaccio's The Decameron, provide a terrifying window into the psychological disintegration of the populace. Boccaccio detailed how the sheer velocity of the dying dissolved all social bonds. Parents abandoned their infected children, civic authority vanished, and basic human dignity evaporated, resulting in feral children and conditions where livestock, like pigs, consumed unburied bodies in the streets.
Total societal abandonment. When survival is on the line and the institutions of order have evaporated, the veneer of civilization washes away completely. Tom Daschle, the former Senate Majority Leader who was personally targeted during the 2001 anthrax attacks, has spent decades deeply immersed in biodefense policy. He offered a quote in the source material that perfectly distills this threat. Comparing biological warfare to nuclear deterrence, he stated, "Biological warfare will be deeply nightmarish. It will be the death of government, people doing inhuman things just to survive."
People doing inhuman things just to survive. That implies that in the aftermath of a catastrophic biological event, the individuals who ultimately survive are not those who cooperated, shared resources, or maintained their humanity. The survivors are those who possess the sheer ruthlessness to completely isolate themselves, treat every other human being as a lethal vector, and aggressively hoard resources at the expense of their community.
Which brings up the billionaires. We are already seeing the most resource-rich individuals on the planet adopting this exact philosophy of ruthless isolation. The source material notes conversations with billionaires and tech executives who are actively building and investing massive sums of capital into remote, fortified properties in geographic locations like New Zealand or subterranean bunkers in the American West, designed specifically to weather an apocalyptic collapse.
But the logistical conversations they are having internally are deeply revealing. They are not discussing strategies for rebuilding civic society or preserving human knowledge. They are engaged in grim, tactical debates about how to maintain physical control over their own armed security details once fiat currency collapses and their wealth becomes entirely conceptual.
Right. They're actively debating the logistics of utilizing centralized food access as a coercive mechanism to enforce loyalty,
Yeah.
or even exploring the implementation of shot callers for their security personnel to prevent mutiny. Doesn't that just prove that no amount of money can buy trust once the social contract burns?
It is the ultimate acknowledgement of the fragility of trust. They understand a fundamental truth. No volume of offshore wealth, cryptocurrency, or physical gold can enforce a social contract once the institutions that validate those concepts have burned down. If your survival strategy relies on placing a shock collar on the person guarding your air filtration system, your society has already failed.
It is an incredibly dark trajectory. But as we summarize and synthesize the vast scope of this deep dive, it is crucial to return to the core purpose of examining these scenarios. We began by comparing the sudden annihilation of a nuclear exchange with the creeping horror of a biological catastrophe. A nuclear war guarantees an instant fiery end. A biological event guarantees a slow, agonizing unraveling of society, fueled almost entirely by our own broken trust and our inability to cooperate in the face of an existential threat.
The overarching message from the intelligence community, the scientific data, and this source material is not intended to induce paralyzing despair. It is an urgent, necessary call for radical awareness, transparency, and a scientific community that prioritizes humility. A community willing to admit we don't know, rather than projecting false certainties.
That is the essential takeaway.
When we discuss biosecurity, the conversation is overwhelmingly dominated by the hardware. HEPA filters, positive pressure suits, rapid genomic sequencing, and stockpiled ventilators. But the ultimate foundational defense mechanism against an existential biological threat is not just an antibiotic or a concrete bunker. It is a resilient, cohesive society. It is a community that possesses a high baseline of trust in its institutions, faith in the transparency of the information it receives, and a deeply ingrained cultural refusal to fracture into hostile factions when subjected to extreme pressure. Trust is our primary, indispensable immune response.
And that leads me to a final chilling thought for you to mull over or explore on your own as we close. We've spent the last hour unpacking the staggering complexities of synthetic biology. We've talked about how brilliant minds in high-security laboratories can utilize recombinant DNA to engineer the perfect pathogen, a virus tailored to bypass our vaccines and completely hack the human immune system. But when you consider how rapidly civil unrest, hoarding, and violent conflict would detonate across our society at the mere confirmed rumor of such an outbreak, maybe the most terrifying realization of all is that the ultimate bioweapon doesn't actually need to hack our biology at all. It only needs to hack our trust in one another. Because once that trust is gone, we become the weapons. Until next time, stay curious.